Fuel costs are at an all-time high. I'm sure you're personally experiencing that. And of course, when we think of the commercial trucking industry, there has been ongoing issues with diesel emission systems. And we think of trucks, and I've heard so many people talking about forced regens and all the challenges that go along with the diesel emission service. So is there one solution that would address both of those problems? Is that just too good to be true? Well, we're going to find out today. My guest is Matt Bailey, the CEO at Decarb USA. He's a passionate diesel head, third generation diesel injection and turbocharger professional. And he spent the early part of his career as a mechanical engineer. So this is the man that we need to talk to. Matt, welcome to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. So glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie. It's a pleasure.
So first of all, what is Decarb? Give us the lowdown on what that stands for.
Yeah, sure. So, obviously it stands for decarbonisation within the engine itself. And so raft of decarb products, we actually have a number of different services and we take a very innovative approach into how we do things differently. And then obviously we actually package them up in a preventative maintenance program that's sort of prescribed by fleet and their requirements.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of the benefits that we were alluding to in our intro, because these are real issues. So let's start with fuel. How much fuel savings are you able to achieve and how do you get there?
Yeah, sure. So generally speaking, and this really depends on the fleet and particularly the engine's application at the moment. And so we typically see much stronger results in applications where there's stop-start and they're stuck in traffic a lot, garbage trucks, school buses, then the like. They will typically see numbers around the 10 to 12%. And then even down to over-the-road trucking, we usually see numbers in the 5 to 7% window.
That's not insignificant. Obviously 10 and 12 is better, but even 5% when you're doing a lot of miles, that's a lot of diesel that you're saving. So that does add up. So give us a little more detail about what you're actually doing for these fleets and how you're getting those fuel savings.
Sure. And so we sort of package up three really different services, and we obviously prescribe how much we do of each based on the fleet's requirements. But the first one, and I guess the most innovative approach that we take, is that we actually do a lot with hydrogen. And so we're all aware that diesel is a hydrocarbon, and obviously we burn a lot of the hydrogen and most of the carbon. But as we can see, anybody who's opened up an engine or even looked inside an exhaust stack will see there's a ton of carbon that still remains within the engine frame. And so we do a couple of different services with the hydrogen. We can produce hydrogen, we call it decarb as a service. So effectively we flood the engine with hydrogen, and that actually will bond with the carbon that's inside the engine frame and just cause a low energy hydrocarbon that can just simply get burnt off and exit the exhaust as CO2 and H2O, which is a really neat solution. And I remember being quite the skeptic when I first came to the company a couple of years ago. You see so many problems with DPFs and, particularly the whole after treatment system. And even in some instances, you'll see some issues with the carbon buildup on the intake side. But there's so little thought and consideration given to the actual carbon buildup that happens inside the engine frame itself. And it's been exacerbated so much by low NOx. That chasing of low NOx has meant that the cylinder temperatures are lower, the cylinder pressures are lower. And as a result, this carbon's allowed to really build up, and it impacts things like piston ring lands, and therefore you get more blow-by and a loss of efficiency. It impacts things like your intake valves and exhaust valves and the airflow. It also impacts the nozzles and the atomization of the fuel around the cylinder. So it doesn't take long. It's very much a compounding issue that creates within the engine frame itself. And so by doing that particular service, and then we usually bundle that up in a preventative maintenance program with a whole after treatment system, basically a refurbishment. We go back and basically remanufacture that whole system so that we know now that the exhaust system is completely clean of carbon and it's flowing properly and it's doing what it's meant to do. But then also the engine frame is now free of carbon. It's now performing better. It's now breathing better. It's now atomizing better. It's producing less particulate in the first place. So there's less for the DPF to do. And those two things start compounding and spiraling up, and we start seeing some pretty significant results for our clients.
Let's talk a little bit more about that diesel emissions system component, because we've talked a lot about that on this show, and we've had many people come and share their expertise. But one thing that I have heard repeatedly is that the DPF is often just the thing that's signaling what's going on somewhere else in the system. And it sounds to me like by addressing the engine and the after treatment system, we're getting rid of all those upstream problems. Is that how you're helping fleets reduce like the situation where there's a forced regen?
Yeah, massively. It's a real bugbear of mine. Like, I'm a super practical sort of guy, and I'm also really passionate about diesel and the way in which the fleet operators have been impacted by this stuff. It's really quite significant. And I'm also passionate about environment and emission standards. So I think it's sort of something that was necessary. But I think as we've sort of 10 years down the path now, we've seen, we originally started with a diesel combustion engine frame, right? And then we added exhaust gas recirculation, and then we added oxidization catalysts, and then we added a DPF, and then we added an SCR. And all of these things, they're independent systems that act independent of each other. And they're basically a Band-Aid solution slapped on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. And our solution, because we're utilizing the hydrogen, we're really hitting it more at the combustion level. Like we're talking, chemistry here, really. And that we're impacting that at a root cause rather than trying to slap Band-Aids and deal with the solutions later on.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Don't have a heavy-duty part number and need to look up a part? Go to parts.diesellaptops.com or download the app on Apple or Android to create your free account. Looking for high-quality fuel injection for heavy-duty applications? Having one supplier for fuel injection allows you to better serve customers by providing them with a complete line, which increases your sales and profitability. Learn more at ambacinternational.com/aftermarket. We're back from our break, and before the break, we were talking about decarbonization and the solution that is offered by Decarb USA and some of the benefits that fleets have been enjoying, including lower fuel consumption and also avoiding problems with the diesel emission system. I'd like to talk more on the maintenance side of things. So, what mistakes are you seeing fleets make with their maintenance programs, and how do we avoid those mistakes?
Look, I think the biggest thing is that the biggest thing that we see personally is a lack of data. There's a lot of fleet owners out there that they will try certain things, but there's a lack of data that's backing up and supporting that evidence. And I think one thing that we're really pushing towards is that data analytically approach, so that we're dealing with the solutions. We're doing tests, and then we're doing a very strong comparative, and we're basically, getting a strong before and after to validate the results. And so when we think about the overall solution for the fleets, I mean, obviously the market's becoming exceptionally competitive. We're entering a really destabilized time where fuel prices are soaring already, and it's only sort of been 24 hours. And so these types of things are going to be more and more important as things move on in the progressing months. And so from our point of view, data is absolutely the one thing that we see the least of in the marketplace.
This will be published later, but we're recording this on February 24th. And of course, Russia has just invaded the Ukraine today. And we're seeing that is just a terrible situation. And yes, it is destabilizing everything globally. So by the time this airs, we will see what the full impact of that is going to be on the global economy, on geopolitics and politics and all of those kinds of things. But certainly as we look to the future, I like the idea of using data, because I go back to one of those old adages: you can't manage what you don't measure. And so throwing parts at the problem, and I think that's been one of the big frustrations, but for a lot of commercial vehicle owners, is for years now they've been replacing DPFs, they've been replacing diesel emission system components, and that stuff's not cheap. And they're just throwing parts at the problem and not really getting to the root cause and not addressing those root causes. So what you're saying is that by bringing in a lot more analytics, you're able to actually measure what you're doing and see whether or not it's making any kind of measurable improvement.
Absolutely. I think, data is one of our core values here at our company, but I think it transcends everything. I mean, ultimately, if you can measure it, you can validate what you've done one way or the other. And it could be, a whole raft of different activities rather than just what we're doing, for example, such as driver behavior and so forth. All of that stuff, if you've got the right data, you can be making very, very well-informed decisions on how you're impacting your behavior to improve your operation and ultimately your bottom line, right? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that for a minute, because one of the things that a lot of companies, they will focus on features and benefits of their products and services, and they'll talk about the benefits, and they'll show kind of the economics of that. But what about doing nothing? What's the economics of doing nothing? Because I've got a big concern when I look at fleets and they aren't being proactive in this regard or in other places with their maintenance program. it's having a cost, but it's just not necessarily registering in the same way as, like, for example, the purchase price of a product or service.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the benefits of what we're doing, I mean, one of the main things that we sell is really the fuel economy benefits, because that's the biggest thing most people are concerned about. That's something that they're chasing. But ultimately, the other two main side effects that we have is that we improve uptime quite significantly. I mean, a lot of people would be doing DPF and after treatment systems on a 12-month cycle, but if we can get to the root cause, we can actually extend that out to 24 or even 36 months. So that's quite, when you're talking 24-hour turnaround on the DPF, you're talking about an uptime improvement of at least 2 days right there. But then, of course, because the DPF is flowing better, there's less particulate in the first place, there's less forced regens, there's less regens in general. So the truck is, you're not parking on the side of the road and doing that, horrid 45-minute thing where the fumes and everything are going all over the place. It's not a very nice environment to have to be in. And then on the other side is obviously the maintenance benefits and cost benefits there. So it's fuel economy for sure, but then it's also the improved uptime of the vehicle, and it's also reduced maintenance costs on the back end of it. So realistically speaking, the fuel economy is the easiest to validate. And so that's what we chase when we do our client stuff. But obviously when we're doing the data, we're obviously also trying to build up the total business case for what we're trying to do. And I think when you start looking at that total business case, you start making quite a significant impact. I mean, obviously not that 10% reduction for a city truck is insignificant. I mean, it's very significant. But then when you start compounding all the other benefits on top as well, you start getting to some very big cost per mile differences. And you don't want to be on the wrong side of that ledger if your competitors are playing in that space.
Total cost per mile and lowering the total cost of operation is the name of the game. You've been listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin. We've been speaking with Matt Bailey, the CEO of Decarb USA. To learn more about Decarb USA, visit decarb.com. Links are in the show notes. Matt, thank you for being on the Heavy Duty Parts Report and helping us challenge the status quo in the trucking industry.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this video. Click here to subscribe to the Heavy Duty Parts Report YouTube channel, and click here to watch another great episode.